We kick off this series of conversations with one of the most active and renowned venture capital funds in India, Sequoia Capital. Rajan Anandan, the managing director of Sequoia India and Surge, sits down with Anant Maheshwari, the president of Microsoft India, to share his insights on the growth levers and opportunities for Indian startups, and also on the role played by the government, by incubators and accelerators to foster a progressive ecosystem.
Rajan, hello, and it's a pleasure to have you here at Future Ready today. You are a leader with a strong tech industry legacy, with an eye on technology as a platform for empowerment, and an investor today, and much, much more. So, you guiding the startup ecosystem in India as an angel investor first, and now as Sequoia's managing director, you've seen the complete space. It's a complex, tricky terrain as we see today, and we look forward to you sharing your insights around this with us. Welcome to Microsoft's Future Ready Startup Week.
Thank you, Anant, for having me. Excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. So I'll get going with my first question. There are so many concepts that are used to describe the startup ecosystem. A lot of names are used: the digital natives, born in the cloud, disruptors, fearless entrepreneurs, voracious app consumers, unicorn club, and so much more. You've been a vital part of this community. So help us define this ecosystem and the people that make it.
Yeah, I think, look, India's ecosystem is now entering sort of a new phase, if you will, Anand. And I think it's characterized by really two major dimensions, right? The first is Indian startups that are innovating across industries for the domestic market, right? So in many ways, even if you go back to 2015, India's startup ecosystem basically was about e-commerce. Then a year or two later, it became all about ride-hailing. A year or two later, it became all about things like edtech. But today, if you look at where we are as an ecosystem, across almost every sector in India, core sectors, right? Healthcare, education, financial services, we are seeing extraordinary innovation. So that's one dimension of this, which is we have now broad-based the startup ecosystem to touch almost every single facet of life, every single industry that we have in India. So that's one part of this. The other part of this is really the globalization of the Indian startup ecosystem. What I mean by that is Indian startups building for the world from day zero, right? If you go back, let's say 3.5 years, India had no unicorns, no SaaS unicorns. Today, we have over 15 of them. And an interesting statistic, Anand, for you and the team, is that if you look at the month of April and you look at new startups that raise between 3 crores and 30 crores, so call it between $500,000 and call it, $3 or $4 million as a seed round, 67% of those companies are Indian startups building for the world from day zero, right? So SaaS companies, dev tools companies, companies in the modern data stack, in the infra space, and so on and so forth, vertical SaaS companies. So basically, India, outside of the US, India is the only country in the world today that has extraordinary amounts of innovation focused on the domestic market, because we have a country with 1.4 billion Indians that is digitizing faster than any other country has. But at the same time, because of the caliber of entrepreneurship has, because of the history of the technology ecosystem, which is, we have a $200 billion IT exports industry, as you know, because of that, we are also able to build these global from day zero companies. And so we've got two very, very exciting parts of this ecosystem. Now, all this being said, Anand, sitting here in June of 2022, we've come a long way, but we're just getting started.
No, it's amazing to hear, especially the numbers that you spoke about, the role of India and the share of India in the global ecosystem. So we're really watching this growth appetite of the startup ecosystem in India, as you said, becoming the third largest in the world, and now in terms of seed funding, a very, very significant share outside of the United States. How do you think this could really be an inflection point in the economy, both in terms of innovation and economic growth?
Yeah, look, we like to sort of look at other countries, right? And today, the largest internet ecosystem in the world, the largest digital ecosystem in the world is China. If you look at China today, Anand, the Chinese digital economy has created 200 million jobs. Okay, so this is a very important statistic. Now, clearly, the Indian digital economy is probably a decade, maybe 15 years behind China in terms of number of internet users, in terms of the kind of innovation that we need, in terms of the kind of capital we need. But there is no reason why we cannot create over 100 million new jobs leveraging the digital economy, right? Because China has already created 200 million jobs. So as we think about the job creation mandate of India, both large tech companies like Microsoft and others, but also increasingly startups, right? Be they in food delivery, be they in ride-hailing, be they in energy storage. I mean, you can kind of go through every single sector. Be they in agri-tech, has the potential to create not just 1, 2, 3, 4 million jobs, but really over 100 million jobs. And, and as you know, India's single biggest challenge as we look at the next decade is how do we create 8 to 10 million new jobs a year. So I think this is super, super important. And I think in many ways is the single most important, that as a nation, we should continue to care about startups. We should continue to invest in innovation, and we should continue to really unleash our extraordinary entrepreneurship talent to go out and innovate for India.
So, Rajan, you brought technology into this. Tech is central to what the startup community does. And therefore, I'd love to understand what exactly is the expectation from the tech platforms by the startup ecosystem, especially around innovation, efficiencies, and great customer experience.
So, Anand, that's a great question. Look, tech platforms play a very, very instrumental role as an enabler to create the ecosystem, right? The digital infrastructure, the digital ecosystem, on top of which startups have to build, right? So, for instance, if you look at what I mentioned a few minutes ago, the newly funded seed companies in India in the month of April, 67% of them were global from day zero companies, SaaS and DevTools companies. Now, the only reason, the primary reason they're able to do that is because of cloud infrastructure, right? So whether it's Microsoft Azure, without those platforms, they really won't be able to do that, right? So cloud infrastructure, the Azure platform is super, super critical. Then on the other hand, if you move over to the consumer internet and all the consumer-focused digitization that's happening, all of that is really enabled by the fact that we have, I think over the next month or two, India is going to cross 700 million monthly active users on the Indian internet. Now, why did that happen? It really happened because of Jio, right? The cost of data went from 250 rupees a gigabyte down to 10 rupees. Now it's drifting up slightly. And Android, right? Because the cost of smartphones, when I joined Google in 2011, the cost of a smartphone was 15,000 rupees. When I left in 2019, 8 years later, the cost, for 3,500 rupees, you could buy a reasonably high quality smartphone. So be it the global platform companies like Microsoft or the Indian sort of platform companies like Jio, the platform companies play a very, very important role as an enabler to create this underlying infrastructure on top of which startups can build, right?
No, this is really interesting to see the change and the transformation that has happened over the last decade, especially. Now, this space has recently been impacted by challenges across the profitability, cash flows, very classical business elements of running a P&L and a balance sheet. How do you really see the next 12 to 18 months unfold for the startup ecosystem in India?
Yeah, I think, look, basically, 2022 is not 2021, as we keep telling our founders. Anand, what happened really starting around middle of 2020, right? We saw sort of a massive and exponential increase in public market tech valuations, right? Which were driven largely by the fact that interest rates went to zero and the US government, pumped over $7 trillion into the US economy, and around the world, similar things happened, right? And all this liquidity obviously drove, when you take interest rates down to zero in a public market valuation, your DCF model essentially shows up a company that's going to be much more valuable. And public market valuations always drive private market valuations. And as a result, we had massive amounts of capital that came into the startup ecosystems around the world, right? In the US, in India, and even in China, actually. China, despite all the challenges last year, had over $130 billion worth of startup funding that went in the Chinese ecosystem. So what has happened now, and as a result, by the way, India went from In the year 2020, India had about $10 billion worth of funding for the full year. Last year, we had over $40 billion, as you know, a 4x growth year on year. So what's happened this year is basically, that environment has changed, right? Because as you know, inflation is at an all-time high. The data yesterday was quite concerning, and interest rates are going up. So we expect that and that the Fed to actually, pull back, or the U.S. government will pull back a lot of the $7 trillion that went into the economy. And as a result, we are seeing, public tech stocks, if you look at public growth stocks outside of the FANG, they've corrected north of 60%, right? So we see it's very significant corrections, and that's driving a correction in private market valuations. So as a result, I think the heady growth days of 2020, second half of 2020 and 2021 are over. In many ways, I would characterize sort of the second half of 2020 and especially 2021 as an era of growth. And growth, and for many companies, growth at any cost. And now it's really become about balanced growth, right? By the way, you still need to grow, because as a startup, if you're not growing, you're not really a startup, and you'll kind of disappear over a period of time. But you have to do it, very thoughtfully, with strong unit economics, with a path to profitability and things like that. So essentially, what we're seeing now is companies doing a couple of things. I think one, they're much more realistic about what it takes to raise a round, and also how much they can raise, let's say in a Series A, at what kind of valuation. But they're also becoming much more rigorous and focused on, optimizing their cost structure, making sure that the growth that they get is growth driven with strong underlying unit economics. And I think it's very, very healthy. So over the next, I think, 12, 18, 24 months, we will see the underlying financial health of the startup ecosystem get much, much better, Anand.
No, it's awesome to hear about how now the companies are getting back to some of the basics of to run a good business. And as the long-term aspirations of all of these companies is to build institutions. As you advise founders, Rajan, what does it take to build these real institutions from the startup innovation that they drive?
I think, look, the most important thing, whether you're a seed funded company, Series A or Series B funded company, is to build a product or a service that users love, that they're going to pay for. And ideally, they're going to pay you more money than it costs for you to deliver that product or service, that they're going to continue to use, right? So we call this sort of insane user love, right? You have to have products, whether it's a consumer product or if you're selling something to businesses, you have to build something that has insane user love, right? The second thing is, look, you've got to just focus on the team and culture, right? Culture trumps everything, and I mean everything. And I think this is an area where, Indian startups have a lot of work to do, right? They hire very strong talent, but don't focus as much on culture. So Surge, which is our seed stage program that I'm a part of, right? We focus enormous amounts of time with our founders on how do you build great cultures, right? How do you make sure that from the very, very early days of a company, how do you attract top quality talent, what we call, how do you build A teams, but as importantly, how do you actually build a great company culture? I think that's number two. I think the third thing is, look, you have to build a business, right? So in the early days, you have a product, you drive lots of product growth, then you have to start generating revenue. But eventually, as you know better than anybody else, Anand, free cash flow trumps everything else. So you've got to build a company with a view that whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that you're going to generate enormous amounts of free cash flow, because that is when you become a truly enduring company. And I think the last thing that has really come to light over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months is corporate governance, right? Our Indian ecosystem is now entering a new phase. To build world-class companies, you have to have world-class corporate governance. So we've been very focused on helping our founders understand what does it take to put in place the processes, the systems, the discipline to actually have a company that will evolve into a company that has world-class corporate governance. So I'd say those are the sorts of things we're talking to our founders about. But at the end of the day, Anand, as with every startup, startups get made or not because of the founders and the co-founding teams, right? So as we think about investing in companies, the thing we continue to focus on, which we always have, which we always will, which is this an awesome team to back that is on a mission to build an enduring company over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Now, great segue, Rajan, to my last question to you. You've been looking at this ecosystem for at least more than a decade. So what is it that inspires you about a particular startup as you look at them on a daily basis, seeing many of them through this critical lens of investment?
Yeah, look. So, Anand, picking, asking to talk about one particular company is a bit unfair because in Surge we now have 112 companies, 250 founders. We have many superbly exciting companies. But look, one theme that I am very excited about, that I'm very passionate about, is how startups can dramatically impact the core sectors of India, right? And one of those core sectors is agriculture. And by the way, I can give you similar many examples in sectors like healthcare, in education, increasingly in energy, in climate tech, in electric vehicles, in batteries, and so on and so forth. But if you look at agri-tech, we made our first investment in agri-tech, Anand, about 3.5 years ago. And now we have about seven agri-tech companies in the Sequoia portfolio, most of which we invested very early. But one company, I mean, by the way, they're all very exciting. So I'm only going to pick one simply because you asked me for one. Is a company called Absolute Foods. It's based right here in Gurgaon. What Absolute Foods does, Anand, is it uses precision farming technology to improve farm yields in the fruits and vegetables space by 30%, right? So this is a company that did many years of research to develop this technology. So what they do is, if you're a fruits and vegetables farm anywhere in India, they give you this technology for free. You use the technology. If you use the technology well and follow sort of the SOPs, if you will, that you have to follow, yields go up by over 30%, right? So the tech is free. And then what they do, Anand, is they actually take the output, right? Their business model of their first act, if you will, is they take the output and then they export it. The global fruits and vegetables export market, Anand, is $180 billion. Okay, India's share today is 1%. Why is it only 1%? Because the fruits and vegetables that we export are not particularly high quality and very inconsistent. Now, what Absolute Foods has done, because of their technology and their SOPs, is Indian farmers are able to produce very high quality fruits and vegetables that are very consistent. So all of a sudden, you open up $180 billion market for Indian farmers who are growing fruits and vegetables. And by the way, this is only the first act. Their second act, which I can't talk about yet, is even more exciting, right? Because it's going to fundamentally can change agriculture around the world. So what we are seeing today, Anand, is companies like Absolute Foods, and I can give you dozens of examples of companies both in our portfolio as well as others that are solving these really hard problems that are population scale problems with deep technology.
Now, fascinating to hear about this concept about going to the core sectors of the Indian economy.
All right, Anand, now that you've asked me many questions, it's time for me to ask you a question. So Anand, tell me, given the digital first mindset of the startup community, there's a natural synergy with an organization like Microsoft. So how has Microsoft's relationship with the startup community evolved over the last several years? And where do you see it going?
No, so thank you so much, Rajan. And clearly, we've been learning. Microsoft is just inspired by the massive growth in this segment. And it just reflects how deeply we are thinking about addressing the ecosystem. The last point that you spoke about, affecting core sectors of the economy and truly making a difference to every person, every organization, is our mission. And therefore, working with startups becomes very natural for us. We have a very strong partnership model, a tech platform, and all the solution areas. And therefore, we use all of that to enable this growth engine for India to scale and grow. And sharing with you that we've seen some success. So today, roughly 6 out of the top 10 unicorns in India are powered by the Microsoft Cloud. Some of the biggest unicorns of the country, like InMobi, Myntra, iCertis, Udan, Oyo, Builder, really use our tools and platforms to build some very unique solutions for India. We also have a flagship Microsoft for Startups program that supports startups in every stage of this journey. And very recently, we launched the Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub, which is a new digital platform for startup founders. So it gives startups free access to technology, tools, resources they need to build and run their businesses. And it's a simple click, log on and get onto the platform. We also recently launched the AI Innovate program for nurturing and scaling startups that leverage AI. So we really recognize that the startups across different industries, as you also spoke, are very different. And that is why we have specially designed programs for startups across the diverse industries that they operate in. The one that you and I spoke of, which is the B2B SaaS growing and ecosystem is very important, because I think the Microsoft Azure marketplace, which is a global marketplace, allows these companies to really find customers very quickly as soon as they get started. So we do have some dedicated programs for health tech and agri-tech, as you just spoke of. So it's very important to also support these core industry-specific solutions and scale them with access to deep tech business and marketing resources. And beyond, I think, access to tech, you spoke about culture. Microsoft is very big on culture, so we try to bring a lot of that capability and learning to the startups, because we really empower entrepreneurs to innovate and grow by connecting them with mentors, potential customers, and industry leaders. So finally, I have to say that we are trying very consciously to make sure that we touch the startups at every stage of their journey, from a startup to a unicorn, and now a decacorn. So definitely trying to help as many of them as possible to truly become the brand ambassadors for India. So with that, Rajan, it's been a fascinating conversation. I know that we've been trying to schedule this, and great to have had this with you. You're always an inspiration for this community across India. Thanks a lot for sharing your candid thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Anand, for having me. Great to see you again.